Well, good evening, everyone, and I thank you for coming tonight, and I welcome you to tonight's Dean's Lectures. It's the sixth of our series this year, and for those who have come for the first time, I think you'll find it most interesting and stimulating, as they always are. Some of you know the drill, but before introducing Ken Ross, I'll just tell you what we're going to do at the end. At the completion, I'm going to ask Patrick Griffin if he would like to acknowledge and thank our speaker, and then I'm inviting you all to join Ken, Patrick and myself just out in the foyer, where we'll give you a little bit to eat and perhaps something to wet the whistle. So now it gives me great pleasure to introduce Dr. Ken Ross. He is a professorial fellow in the Graduate School of Education. He's also a fellow of the International Academy of Education. He is a graduate of this university. He has an honours science degree in 1967, so he was getting that when I came in, so that's why we didn't overlap quite. But he also has a Bachelor of Education, a Diploma of Education, a Master of Education, and a Doctor of Philosophy, all from Melbourne. But also, and importantly, he has a Diploma of Survey Sampling from the University of Michigan. And I think that's given him that bit of background that's led him to be now an internationally recognised expert in quantitative research methods for education policy and the use of formula funding approaches to school finance models and other things. Ken has many links to research institutions in Australia and overseas. He started his career as a secondary maths teacher, but within about 3 years he went to the Australian Council for Educational Research as a research officer, and he did some lectures at La Trobe, Melbourne, Deakin universities in areas like education statistics, education management and qualitative research methods. In 1989 he joined UNESCO. In that first year he was a senior research fellow, then took up a readership at Deakin for 5 years, then returned to UNESCO as a senior program specialist, then coordinator of the technical project management in the International Institute of Education Planning. I didn't actually count them, but I think that Ken's got more than 100 research publications, and these come in the form of books, research reports, articles, chapters in books, conference papers and technical papers. His former colleague Neville Postlethwaite was a close collaborator for over 30 years, and he described Ken as a man with great foresight backed up by hard work, claimed his tenacity and leadership and his ability to swiftly react to the changing demands that this sort of work brings. These were important attributes. They had to be, because his project work took him to Indonesia, to Sweden, to Italy, to Vietnam, to Laos, worked with the World Bank on training courses in Mongolia, Cambodia, Laos, Vietnam, and Japanese organised courses in Indonesia, Malaysia and Thailand. One of the things he's best known for in Australia is his Disadvantaged Schools Index, which is used to equalise the opportunities offered to students once they arrive at school. But his recent and very significant part of his research has involved him in organising ministries from 15 African countries. They classified themselves as the Southern and Eastern African Consortium for Monitoring Education Quality, otherwise known as SACMEQ, and leading the research regarding the development of an HIV AIDS Knowledge test presented to upper primary level pupils, and that's of course the topic of tonight's lecture. Ken, I'm really pleased that you've said that you would give this Dean's lecture. I welcome you to the microphone, and ladies and gentlemen, could you please welcome him with me?
Well, Phil, thanks for that wonderful introduction, and welcome everybody this evening. I am a graduate of Melbourne University, a very proud graduate, and the education that I've received here give me many opportunities throughout Australia and other countries over the past 40 years. For the past 20 years I've been working in the United Nations system at an institute called the International Institute for Educational Planning. It's part of UNESCO in Paris, and I've been working on trying to improve the quality of education in 15 education systems in Southern and Eastern Africa. over those years, we've had close linkages with Melbourne University staff, especially Pat Griffin, Brian Caldwell, Peter Hill, Margaret Wu, and a number of others. And I'm looking forward to continuing that personal and professional linkages with Melbourne University. In this lecture, I'll talk about the structure of an institution, an intergovernmental agency, it is now, called the Southern and Eastern African Consortium for Monitoring Educational Quality. It's a club of ministries of education, a mixture, some Anglophone, some Portuguese speaking, Kiswahili speaking, that are joined together to conduct world-class, world-standard work on monitoring the quality of education. Field mentioned the name of Neville Postlethwaite. He's very famous in the world, as sort of seen as the father of quantitative cross-national research in education. And one of the great concerns that Neville and I shared was that the often limited impact that educational research has on educational policy. We thought that there was a communication breakdown between the decision-making side of education systems and the researchers who were supposed to deliver information for decision-making. And one of the thoughts we had about 20 years ago was, when we were invited to work in Africa, was to see if we could turn the tables a little, and instead of letting the researchers go off and do their curiosity-driven research on issues that they were concerned with, we thought we'd develop a structure whereby the decision-makers ruled the zone where research questions are defined, to put ministers of education in the driving seat and make them drive the whole research process with the policy concerns that they were interested in, and let the researchers then deliver information that was focused on those issues. And I think it's been very successful. I think the way in which SACMEQ works now is a very unique thing. Each year the 15 ministers of education meet for a day and talk about research to research teams and to each other about issues concerned with the quality of education in their zone of the world. It's a pretty rare experience when you see it all in action. It's something that would never happen in a developed country context, but we've been able to achieve it in Southern and Eastern Africa. And they're interested in, the ministers are interested in the sorts of things ministers are interested anywhere in the world. The quality of education, literacy levels, numeracy levels for kids, policy issues, grade repetition, ability streaming, gender differences, the literacy and numeracy levels of teachers. One of the great things you can do in a developing country context when you've got a governing board of ministers is you can go into the schools and test the teachers. Something to be very difficult to do in a developed country context. In 2007, the ministers suddenly a kind of a degree of panic set in amongst the ministers, because the HIV/AIDS pandemic was bearing down on this region of the world, and there was anecdotal evidence about the weakness of a lot of the HIV/AIDS prevention education programs. And they came to the SACMEQ research teams and said, expressed their concern and said, we really don't think the kids are getting the basic knowledge required to protect and promote health in the face of this pandemic. So off we went and started a separate research program, which I'll talk about in a little more detail shortly, that tried to take a systematic approach to how we might measure what is basic knowledge for about HIV and AIDS, which is focused on preserving and promoting health. So let's have a little, I'll give you a little look at SACMEQ structure, and then we'll go into and have a little look at some of the new research results. And these are literally, you're the first group to see some of these results, because the data files were only finished about 6 to 8 weeks ago. Nothing's published yet, so it'll be interesting to hear your reaction. This is the part of the world we're working in. It overlaps with something called SADC, the Southern African Development Cooperative, which is a group of all these countries plus Angola and I think Madagascar. But it's we hope to swallow up Angola and Madagascar soon and make a perfect coverage of the SADC zone. It also includes the Seychelles, Mauritius and Zanzibar, which is actually a state, or Tanzania is a federation of mainland Tanzania and the little island of Zanzibar, but we treat it as a separate country because it has a separate Ministry of Education. So there's 15 members of SACMEQ, and its main mission is to deliver training and research programs for African educational planners and researchers that will enable them to monitor and evaluate the quality of education and generate research-based information for decision makers. So it's a training and a research program, a composite one. Here's some of the basic profile information about the countries. They vary from countries like Swaziland with about 1 million people up to 48 million in South Africa, and very tiny countries with 85,000 in Seychelles. So it's a huge spectrum of population size, and also if you have a look at the GDP per capita, there's a very large variation between the richest and the poorest. These countries are generally poor, but in fact the variation between them is very large compared to, say, the OECD countries, where the ratio between the richest and the poorest might be about 5 to 1. In SACMEQ it's up around 10, 20 to 1 in some instances. This is an aberration because of the collapse in Zimbabwe's economy in around 2007. The other thing you'll notice is there's been, most of their education systems have grown, and I've got the grade 6 enrolments there. Grade 6 is the focal point for SACMEQ research because it's the grade after which there's a big dropout from schooling. So the ministers have always been interested in trying to get an assessment of the yield of an education system before kids start disappearing. And the critical one for us in terms of the measurement of HIV/AIDS knowledge is have a look at the average age of kids at grade 6 level in those countries. The overall average is about 13.5, but in Tanzania, for instance, is 14.6. Quite a number of them 14. By normal standards they'd be about 11 or 12, but in Africa kids go to school late. If the school is far from where they live, their parents don't like them walking 5 kilometres to school if they're 5 years old. There's a lot of grade repetition, and there's a lot of movement in and out of the system, where kids will go off tending crops or herds and then come back and be delayed a grade and so on. So in terms of HIV/AIDS knowledge, this is the prime group, and we'll come back a little bit to that later, because a lot of the effort that's been put into HIV/AIDS prevention education programs in Africa is coming in at the junior secondary level, which is far too late, much too late. The structure of SACMEQ, I'll just go through this very briefly. Down this side is the flow of planning and direction, starting with the Ministers of Education through to there's 15 different research teams with 15 national research coordinators and 2 deputies, and plus they'll have a group underneath them. So there might be, say, 10 in each country working at different times, depending on the flow of projects that are operational. And down the other side is where myself and my friend Patrick and many others make contributions to training, because the philosophy of this program is that the African research teams should be in a learning by doing mode, and all that we should provide is training. We shouldn't actually do anything. So whenever they get to a sticking point with a project, we'll come in with a training activity that'll unblock things and move it ahead. But all the African ministers and the managing committee and the research teams really are the hands-on people who run the project. The conceptual model is very similar in many ways to the cross-national studies run by IEA and OECD, looking at impacts of school characteristics, learner characteristics and teacher characteristics on learning achievement outcomes. And we've, in the past with SACMEQ, we've focused on reading and mathematics, but as I said, after 2007, the ministers wanted to take a look at HIV/AIDS. SACMEQ's had 3 projects underway over the years. The latest one is the SACMEQ III Project, and you'll see there the growth in complexity of the projects, moving from 7 ministries to 14 to 15, 20,000 kids in that study, 40,000. In the latest one, 61,000 kids, 8,000 teachers, 2,800 schools approximately, and the different sorts of data collection. So the SACMEQ III Project is a truly massive study. Two full days of data collection in any sample school, 150 to 250 schools per country, sometimes more. Once again, you'll see that we're in the great position of being able to test the teachers, and using technology that this Faculty of Education is famous for and has developed and is driving the world in rash scaling, we're able to put the pupils and teachers on the same scale and make direct comparisons between them. Now, why were the ministers interested in HIV/AIDS education prevention programs? Well, these figures tell the whole story of an estimated 33 million infected with HIV, 22.5 million of them are in sub-Saharan Africa. Just 2/3 of the problem sitting there, and even more important for this work is that a good 10% of the kids in that region under the age of 15 are living with HIV infection. So it's a critical issue, focused very strongly in that region of the world, and it's not unusual that the ministers should be so interested in this. That's a list of the 15 SACMEQ countries, and on the left-hand side is the ranking in order of prevalence. So SACMEQ countries take up the top nine for, if you can say top, but the 9 countries in the world suffering most from HIV infection, and just have a look at those rates at the top of the scale there. There's, you know, these are conservative. 1 in 5 people, 1 in 5 adults could be infected, and if left unattended, perhaps a 7 or 8 year wait to advancing to full-blown AIDS, and then that's it. So there's a tragedy going on here. It's a tragedy of enormous proportions, and a double tragedy, I think, that this sort of thing has slipped off the newspaper front pages. It used to be around a few years ago, but we don't see a lot about it these days. Things have gone quiet. The ministers wanted to know what the kids knew about HIV that would protect and promote their health. So they said, how about building a knowledge test? So like good researchers, off we went and did our literature review, looking for other people who'd done some work in this area. We expected we'd just go around and talk to the gurus in the field and collect some good tests and put something together and fine-tune it for Africa and get on with our work. But we came to a grinding halt because we couldn't find anything that was suitable for upper primary school level. There was a lot of stuff going on with young adults. And when we scratched a little deeper, we found the famous UNGAS indicator, UNGAS indicator 13. The UNGAS stands for United Nations General Assembly, and it has 20 indicators on the situation of HIV/AIDS around the world, reported on yearly, and this was the knowledge indicator. 5 questions. The percentage of young people aged 15 to 24 who provide correct answers to the following questions about sexual transmission of HIV and misconceptions about HIV. And here, so these 5 questions are plugged into household surveys, and the results of this 5-item scale are used to make major statements about knowledge improvement or the knowledge situation across all of these countries. When we put it in front of our SACMEQ researchers, the first thing they said, well, the first question seems a bit strange. It's kind of 3 questions in one, you know, with only one partner. That's one question. An uninfected partner, and then who has no other partners. Plus it's got 3 negations in it, or qualifiers, only one, and no other. So it's a pretty linguistically complex question to be putting in front of populations who have limited reading skills. Then they started criticising the target group, 15 to 24-year-olds. Why bother about the knowledge of 15 to 24-year-olds? Shouldn't we be getting lower in the spectrum, down to 13 and 14-year-olds before, well, hopefully before they become sexually active, so that they've got some knowledge to base their guide their decision making in that area. Then we scratched a little further, and there was a strange statement saying you should use these questions to assess the knowledge of the community about HIV/AIDS. But, and I'll quote, the first 3 questions, this is from the United Nations Handbook on Indicators for HIV/AIDS. The first 3 questions should not be altered. However, questions 4 and 5 ask about local misconceptions and may be replaced by the most common misconceptions in your country. So you could sort of make up your own indicator and just sort of mix it all around and so on. and all sorts of odd statements. Statement number 4, the justification there is, once again quoting from the handbook, the belief that HIV is transmitted through mosquito bites can weaken motivation to adopt safer sexual behaviour. Well, before I started this, I was suspicious that mosquitoes spread HIV/AIDS myself, so that was obviously weakening my motivation to adopt safer sexual behaviour. But the whole thing was sort of, if it wasn't, it would be laughable if it wasn't so tragic that we should be judging the success of inputs of hundreds of millions of dollars because into these programs and just basing it on things like this. We embedded these questions in the SACMEQ data collection, and so we're actually able to calculate what the reliability of the scale would be, and it's about 0.25, I think, 0.28, which sort of doesn't mean it's worth much at all. So there were problems with the UNGATS 13 indicator. We couldn't find an alternative guidance to build a knowledge indicator. So we just went back to step 1 and tried to build it ourselves. The first thing we do is we got a couple of experts in, and they started fighting with each other over the definition of AIDS. The UN AIDS group, which is the peak body for the joint program of the United Nations, had a definition. The acquired immunodeficiency syndrome is a fatal disease caused by HIV. And then we went and talked to the UNESCO group, and AIDS is not a disease. It's a syndrome, a group of illnesses resulting from a weakening of the immune system. So right at the beginning, even for the fundamental constructs being assessed, we had a bit of a battle on our hands because the experts didn't always agree on fundamental definitions. So we started to build our own test, and we wanted to make it linguistically accessible, so we had to build something very simple in terms of language skills. We went and collected all the official curricula and the teaching guides and materials that are being used in those countries and did a detailed analysis of it. We thought we were operating at the correct age level, target population of grade 6, and started to build the test. And it took probably at least a year and a half all told to build it, including getting all sorts of approvals to collect this information, because many of the questions, I think there'd be, if someone proposed that we put this test in front of grade 6 in Australia, I think that wouldn't fly, because there are questions about sexuality and other issues which some people might get upset about. So it was a long haul to get approvals. We wanted to prevent reading skills dominating the capacity to answer the question, so we set it up so it was like a group interview. The questions would be asked twice and the kids would respond, and we wrote them in true-false format. So there were 86 questions that the kids responded to after having each question read to them as a group. As I said, in many countries, this was, say, 100, 200 schools, about 25 kids per school, all selected according to scientific sampling procedures. And a lot of work went into the analysis of the test, and reliability ended up at 0.85, which is quite good for a true-false items test. The administration of it was very structured. There was a lot of training to get the data collectors to administer in a standardised way that it wouldn't interfere with the way in which the kids responded. There were practice questions, so we could teach kids like what a true-false question was. There's one there, elephants can fly like birds, true or false. We had other ones like Mr. Mandela was president of the USA, true or false. These were practice on what is a true or false question. And double reading and a lot of supervision and checking of protests. And then at the end we had a special session where we had to take the test and reteach the kids the correct answers and explain to them, because the last thing you want to do is to get a crazy test question that could give them a distorted information. After we analysed the curricula, we isolated 5 main knowledge topics and 43 subtopics, which we felt gave a fair coverage of the curriculum. And we wrote 3 or 4 questions per knowledge subtopic, and then trial tested them, and then tuned the test down and selected 2 good questions for each of these knowledge subtopics, which range from terminology issues, the body fluids questions, hygiene, mother to child, external sources of needles in animals, etc., sexual contact, social contact, diagnosis and treatment, and myths and misconceptions. Here's a couple of example items, just to give you an idea. HIV can be transmitted by blood. 86% of the kids got that right. A person can get HIV by eating spoiled food, 71%. A person can avoid getting HIV, 71%. AIDS can be cured, 61%. A person can get HIV from a person who looks healthy, 51%. Now these are true-false questions. Once you get to 50% here, you're in a guessing zone. This is guessing. These are kids who are grade 13 and a half who didn't know that very critical issue that just the looks of someone really doesn't tell you about whether you could damage your own health by getting involved in a sexual relationship. We formed up 3 forms of scores, what are called transformed scores. These are scaled scores with a regional mean of 500 and a standard deviation of 100. And then the SACMEQ researchers wanted something that had something the ministers could get their teeth into, and they went for, they called it the minimal knowledge scores and desirable. 50% coverage of the official curriculum. Now, if you know 50% of the questions, if you've got 100 questions, you know 50%, you'll get 50 correct. And if you guess the other 50, you'll get a score of 75. So the cut-off point was 75 items, percent of the items correct, to say, well, they wanted to say that that was equivalent to having a knowledge of half of the official curriculum. And here, 75 transferred to 87.5. So we conducted the analyses, and we got to the situation of posing the question, what knowledge do grade 6 pupils and their teachers have about HIV/AIDS? And here you're the first people outside SACMEQ to see this table. In the first column you've got the transformed scale scores. coming from Mauritius down to Tanzania, and it's a pretty big range. It's about 125 score points over one student standard deviation. But more easy to understand and talk about are these percentage of kids reaching the minimal level and the desirable level. The aim put forward by the ministers was that 100% of the kids should be reaching this level and at least half the kids at that level. So you can see there's a gaping hole in the knowledge level of the kids here. But across with the teachers, wow, the teachers are miles ahead of the kids. The teachers know it all. Now, people say, well, it's not so surprising, the teachers know more than the kids. But in maths or reading, where a subject goes on and on and on and gets more and more complex, that's one thing. What we're talking about here is a bounded, finite set of about 50 pieces of knowledge that ought to be picked up, I would think, if you gave kids 10 lessons of it, you should be able to cover this knowledge base. So while the HIV/AIDS prevention education is on the curriculum, there's textbooks, materials, and the teachers know all about it, the kids know not much at all. So what's going on? This is one of the things that's now erupting in that part of the world. In 2 weeks' time there'll be a big meeting in southern Africa because of this table to say what the hell is happening. There's hundreds of millions of dollars gone into creating teaching materials, in-service education, and these kids don't really seem to know much at all, and they're at this vulnerable age of 13 and a half. So that table is sending a few shockwaves through the system right now, and we'll see what comes of it. It's just another way of presenting it in a different drawing. Each line is 100%. Up the top there you'll see the red component is when the kids are below the minimal level, and the green component is the percentage of kids who are above. And you'll see when you compare the pupils with the teachers, you see the teachers all above the minimal level line pretty well, and high percentages above the desirable level, and many of the kids, or most of the kids, below, just to give a contrast. SACMEQ switched across much more to a visual presentation of its results in recent years because it catches the decision maker's eyes much more readily. Now, okay, there's variations between countries and the overall knowledge level is low, but what's going on within some of these countries? Let's have a look at some of the results. Here's Mozambique. So within Mozambique is, the SACMEQ average is about 500. Mozambique is scoring a bit above the SACMEQ average, but you can see there's a massive regional variation in knowledge across Mozambique. Once again, though, the teachers seem to know what's happening. Here's a graphical way of looking at it. We set this up to give a demonstration to the Mozambique minister. Here you've got the SACMEQ countries. Red means far below the SACMEQ average, a little below, around the SACMEQ average, and then increasingly above. So you can see Zimbabwe and Lesotho far below, and Tanzania far above. Mozambique about the average, but you can see within Mozambique these are using the same colour codes for regions as there are for countries. You can see that in Mozambique you've got the full spectrum of performance within the country. So it's not just the overall national levels of knowledge are low, but then there's serious inequities within some of these countries that need to be addressed at a national level. See Mauritius at a very low level, very traditional, sort of old-fashioned Indian society, very reserved view of all these matters. One of the countries that still has not embarked on formal curriculum for this in schools, but last year they had a medical doctor became Minister for Education, and when he was shown a preliminary view of this, there's going to be a massive change in the Mauritius curriculum starting this year to improve that situation. Mauritius is very famous. It's one of the countries that I don't know if you know much about it, but there's education fanatics in Mauritius. They're very, very serious about their education, and a few years ago when the public became unhappy with the education system, they voted every sitting member of Parliament out in a super landslide situation. Here's another way of looking at the national and regional variations that we've been using when we're talking to the ministers. This is another one that we drew for Mozambique. Here are the SACMEQ countries here, and then we've drawn for Tanzania and Mauritius and Mozambique the regional mean scores, and you'll see that one region, two regions in Mozambique are below the lowest country, and one is above the highest country, I think, or pretty close to it. So these the degree of variation among countries and the degree of variation among regions within countries are other important stories. Gender differences among grade 6 pupils in knowledge about HIV/AIDS. There was a massive fight in the team that I was working on where people were hotly arguing that the girls would know more and the boys would know more, and people had all sorts of theories about it. But when we had to look at the data, there's not much difference in SACMEQ overall between knowledge of the boys and the girls. In some countries there are differences, and statistically in red means that the difference is greater than 2 standard errors. But in fact those differences are only around 20 score points, which is about 1/5 of a student's standard deviation. So there isn't that much difference in boys and girls knowledge, and it's not consistent. It flips around a fair bit. So I think maybe there's some country-specific patterns there, but my feeling is that the margins are a bit too small to put a case for a large difference between boys and girls knowledge. One of the interesting things to do is to break down the variation in knowledge into 2 components: the component of knowledge that's between schools and the component of knowledge that's between kids within schools. And this sort of display gives you a bit of a picture here. You've got the length of the line is the distance between the kids, a rough indicator of the distance between the kids with high and low knowledge. It's the variance. And the dark green is the component of variation due to variation between schools and variation between kids within schools. So you'll see in Mauritius, pretty well all the variation in knowledge is between kids within schools. Hardly any differences between the schools. But in Mozambique and Malawi and South Africa, there's a huge chunk of variation between the schools, which has these sorts of things suggest other kinds of policy options. For example, in what's going on. I mean, one needs to ask the question, the Tanzanians seem to know a lot, but how come there's such a massive amount of variation between kids within schools in that country? There's some kids in the same school being treated differently. And Malawi and Mozambique and South Africa. Why should there be such massive variation between the schools? We don't have any anything much to say at this point of time in explaining those features, but they certainly open up areas for further investigation. This was tragic. There's some other variables in the data file. How did grade 6 teachers rate their own risk of becoming infected with HIV? This shocked us. So the red line is the percentage of teachers who rate themselves as very high or high risk. So in Malawi, 60% of the teachers at the grade 6 level are giving themselves a high rating of getting HIV/AIDS. Now, in Malawi, they've got a pretty good knowledge about HIV/AIDS, the teachers. So you've got what's going on here? What's going on in some of these countries where the teachers know quite a lot about it, yet they just say, well, I'm going to get it anyway. And this is frightening a lot of people in this field, because if you know a lot about the dangers of something, but you do it anyway, but you assess yourself at high risk anyway, means we don't have a knowledge issue, we have perhaps an attitudinal issue. And maybe education isn't the only way to seek a solution here. Maybe or part of the HIV/AIDS prevention education program need to be attitudinal or value systems, but knowledge is not enough. That's what these figures are saying. That was quite depressing when we saw that. These are the educated elite of a society taking this view. What about the kids? You know, the ministries of education. Well, Botswana says, well, it's not only do we teach them HIV/AIDS prevention education, it's in every school subject. Every teacher has to teach it every day, included in maths, included in English. But when you ask the kids, have they been to any lessons on HIV/AIDS this year? No. The red line's saying no. Haven't had any lessons on HIV/AIDS during this school year in our school. And you see large numbers of kids there. So it's probably not being taught, even though it's on the curriculum, they've got the teaching materials. And the current theory is that the in-service education programs offered to the teachers teach them about HIV/AIDS, doesn't teach them to teach about HIV/AIDS. Right, well, this is even more interesting. What about the grade 6 kids? What did they nominate as the best source of information about HIV and AIDS? We gave them a list to select the best source of information from media and individual people. And you'll see that they're going for the electronic, and the 42.3% was mostly radio and TV. Mostly radio and TV. So the kids are saying their best source of information from outside school, not from the teacher or the health professional. So that there's a message there, I think, that perhaps we need to use, put a bit more effort into what's on the electronic media. And this is probably our most important outcome from this study, the curriculum gaps. I'll see if I can link to another table here. These are all the test questions in the test, the 86 questions, and across the top are countries. And a green symbol means that 75% of the kids have mastered that concept. This is the table for kids, and you'll see it green, and then you'll see it going into red. They're sorted in order of item difficulty. And you see these are all the issues down here where there's problems, where the kids have no knowledge, and we're sending this out to all the ministries so they can have a look at their ministry and see where the knowledge gaps are across the curriculum. And similarly for teachers, if you draw the same thing for teachers, you'll see mostly green. The few. So that's a very, very important contribution. And let's return to where we set off from, the old UNGAS 13 indicator and its linkage to this new test we've got. And if you draw a graph of national rankings, you get this. There's basically, except for Tanzania, which rated highly, and Mauritius and Lesotho, which rated low on rankings for both indicators, the rest are all over the place. So we think that the current UN system for rating countries and measuring change over time is a nonsense and a scandal, really. And we hope that some of these data will turn that around and get things onto more of a rational basis. Okay. In future directions, there's a lot more research going on in this area. We're doing different language versions of the test. We've got French, Portuguese, Kiswahili, Afrikaans, English, and there's interest from Vietnam and China. So we're plenty to keep us busy over the coming years. Okay, thank you very much.